The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Penelope Hathaway stumbled across the barren New Mexico territory, her arms aching from carrying the small bundle wrapped in a tattered quilt, the only family she had left in this world. Penelope's throat burned with thirst as she trudged along the dusty trail. The year was 1875, and the unforgiving landscape of the American frontier showed no mercy to a woman alone, especially one burdened with both grief and precious cargo. Her sister, Mary, had died just 3 days prior, leaving behind her newborn daughter Daisy, who was now solely Penelope's responsibility. "Hush now, little one," Penelope whispered as the baby stirred in her arms. "We'll find somewhere safe soon." She adjusted her grip on the bundle, wincing at the blisters forming on her palms. Her once fine dress was now torn and caked with dust after days of walking. The stagecoach that had been carrying them to Santa Fe had broken an axle, and the other passengers had continued on horseback. With no money for a horse and a baby to care for, Penelope had been left behind with only vague directions to the nearest town. The baby whimpered, her tiny face scrunching in discomfort. Penelope stopped in her tracks, gently bouncing the child as she had seen her sister do countless times. The thought of Mary sent a fresh wave of anguish through her heart. They had been traveling west after receiving word that Mary's husband had been killed in a mining accident, leaving Mary a widow with a newborn. The plan had been to start anew in Santa Fe, where a distant cousin had offered them room and board. But then the fever had taken Mary, swift and merciless, leaving Penelope alone with her infant niece. As darkness descended fully upon the landscape, Penelope spotted a faint glow in the distance. Hope surged through her weary body. A town, or at least a homestead, lay ahead. She quickened her pace despite her exhaustion, desperate to reach shelter before the night creatures emerged. The sound of hoofbeats caused her to freeze, riders approaching from behind. In her experience, strangers on the frontier could mean salvation or danger, and a woman alone had reason to fear the latter. Penelope stepped off the trail, seeking the cover of a large boulder as the riders drew closer. "Whoa there, Atlas," a deep voice commanded, and the hoofbeats slowed. "Miss, are you all right?" Penelope remained silent, clutching the baby tighter to her chest. The bundle squirmed and a soft cry escaped. She closed her eyes, knowing her position was now revealed. "I can hear that, little one," the voice called out again, gentler this time. "I don't mean you any harm, miss. My name's Garrett O'Malley. I work the Silver Creek Ranch just yonder, been helping the sheriff track some rustlers, and I'm heading back now." Penelope hesitated, then slowly stepped out from her hiding place. The man atop the large black horse was silhouetted against the deepening blue of the night sky. She could make out broad shoulders and the distinctive shape of a cowboy hat. "Are you headed somewhere, miss?" Garrett asked, his voice tinged with concern. "It's not safe for a lady and a little one to be out here after dark. I'm trying to reach the nearest town," Penelope replied, her voice hoarse from thirst and disuse. "Our stagecoach broke down 2 days back." The man dismounted with fluid grace, and as he approached, the moonlight revealed his features. He was tall and weathered, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. His face was partially obscured by a neatly trimmed beard, but she could tell he was handsome in a rugged way that spoke of hard work under the western sun. "That'd be Silver Creek, about 5 miles ahead," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Too far to walk tonight, especially with a little one." As if on cue, the baby began to cry in earnest, her thin wails piercing the night air. Penelope tried to soothe her, but her own arms were trembling with fatigue. Garrett O'Malley stepped closer, his expression softening as he gazed at the struggling woman and the crying infant. "Madam," You look about ready to drop. Let me carry you both to the ranch. It's closer than town, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins, can help with the little one." Penelope stiffened, her instincts warning her against trusting this stranger. Yet something in his eyes spoke of genuine concern rather than threat. "I don't even know you, sir," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Garrett nodded, understanding her hesitation. "That's fair enough. But I give you my word as a gentleman that I intend only to help. The ranch belongs to my uncle, Walter O'Malley. Perhaps you've heard of him. He's well respected in these parts." The name did sound vaguely familiar, and Penelope's resolve wavered as Daisy's cries grew more insistent. The baby needed milk, warmth, and proper care, things Penelope couldn't provide on the trail. "Let me carry you both," Garrett said again, extending his hands. "My horse Atlas is strong and sure-footed. He'll get us to the ranch in no time." Penelope looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deceit. Finding none, she made her decision. "Very well, Mr. O'Malley," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "I accept your assistance." Relief washed over his face as he stepped forward. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her and the baby. At her nod, he gently lifted both Penelope and the bundled infant in one smooth motion, cradling them against his chest. The sudden lack of burden made Penelope realize just how exhausted she truly was. She found herself leaning into the solid warmth of this stranger, the first comfort she'd felt since Mary's passing. Garrett carried them to his horse, and with remarkable care, managed to mount while still holding them. He settled Penelope's side saddle in front of him, one strong arm secured around her waist while the other held the reins. "Hold tight to the little one," he instructed softly. "Atlas knows the way home." As they rode through the darkness, Penelope felt herself drifting into an exhausted sleep. The gentle rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid presence of the cowboy behind her lulling her into a sense of security she hadn't expected to find in the wilderness. Little did she know that this chance encounter on a desolate trail would change the course of her life forever. Penelope awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Soft morning light filtered through lace curtains, illuminating a modestly furnished but clean bedroom. She lay on a feather mattress, covered by a patchwork quilt that smelled of lavender and sunshine. Memory flooded back the endless walking, the cowboy on horseback, the sensation of being carried. She bolted upright. "Daisy!" she cried, scanning the room frantically. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "Your little one is just fine, dearie," the woman said, entering the room with a bundle in her arms. "Been feeding her some goat's milk with a bit of sugar water. She took to it right well." Relief washed over Penelope as the woman placed Daisy in her arms. The baby looked peaceful, her tiny face relaxed in sleep. "I'm Mrs. Wilkins, the housekeeper here at Silver Creek," the woman continued, bustling about the room, opening curtains wider to let in more light. "And you gave us quite a scare, Miss Hathaway." "Penelope Hathaway," she supplied, her voice still rough with sleep. "And this is my niece, Daisy." Mrs. Wilkins nodded. "Mr. Garrett brought you in near midnight, both of you looking half dead from exposure. Dr. Simmons came by and said you were suffering from exhaustion and dehydration, but would recover with rest and proper nourishment." Penelope stroked Daisy's cheek with a finger. "I don't know how to thank Mr. O'Malley for his kindness. That boy's got a good heart, despite all he's been through," Mrs. Wilkins said with obvious affection. "Lost his parents young, he did. Came to live with his Uncle Walter when he was just 12. Worked his way up from stable boy to foreman of this whole operation." Curiosity piqued. Penelope wanted to ask more about her rescuer, but was distracted by Daisy stirring in her arms. "Now then," Mrs. Wilkins said briskly, "there's a bath drawn for you in the washroom. I've laid out some clean clothes that should fit well enough belong to Walter's daughter before she married and moved east. When you're ready, come down for breakfast. You need feeding up, if you don't mind my saying so." Left alone, Penelope carefully placed Daisy on the center of the bed, surrounding her with pillows before she took advantage of the offered bath. The warm water was a luxury she hadn't experienced in weeks, and she scrubbed away the dirt and sorrows of the trail as best she could. The borrowed dress was simple but well made, a blue calico that complemented her fair complexion. Penelope braided her damp chestnut hair and pinned it up, trying to make herself presentable before facing her hosts. With Daisy once again in her arms, Penelope made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and bacon. She entered a spacious kitchen where Mrs. Wilkins was busy at the stove. At the table sat Garrett O'Malley, his hat resting beside him as he read a newspaper. He looked up as she entered, and Penelope was struck by how the morning light revealed details she'd missed in the darkness. His hair was the color of burnished copper, and his eyes were a clear, striking blue. A scar ran through his right eyebrow, adding character to his otherwise handsome face. Garrett stood immediately, folding the newspaper and setting it aside. "Miss Hathaway," he greeted her with a slight bow, "it's good to see you up and about. How are you feeling this morning?" "Much improved, thanks to your kindness," Penelope replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance despite the clean clothes. "Mr. O'Malley, I cannot express my gratitude adequately for what you did last night. You may have saved both our lives." A flush crept up his neck, and he waved away her thanks. "Any decent man would have done the same. Please join me for breakfast. Mrs. Wilkins makes the best flapjacks in the territory." As Penelope settled at the table, Mrs. Wilkins swooped in to take Daisy. "I'll hold the little angel while you eat, dearie. Got to keep up your strength if you're caring for two." Over a hearty breakfast, Penelope explained her situation, her sister's death, the broken-down stagecoach, and her plan to reach Santa Fe where a distant cousin might take them in. "Santa Fe is still a good 3 days' journey by stage," Garrett said, frowning, "and traveling with an infant that young, it won't be easy." "I have no choice," Penelope said firmly. "I have no other family, no means of support. My cousin Julia is my only hope." "You could stay here until the little one is stronger," Mrs. Wilkins suggested, bouncing Daisy gently in her arms. "The ranch always needs extra hands, even if it's just to help with the mending and cooking." Penelope blinked in surprise. "I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition," Garrett interrupted. "My Uncle Walter would be the first to offer. He and his wife are currently in Denver on business, but they'd approve, I'm certain of it." I don't know what to say," Penelope stammered, overwhelmed by their generosity. "Say yes," Garrett replied with a gentle smile. "At least until you're fully recovered and we can arrange proper transportation to Santa Fe." The thought of not having to immediately face another grueling journey was tempting beyond measure. Penelope looked at Daisy, peacefully sleeping in Mrs. Wilkins' experienced arms. The baby deserved a chance to regain her strength too. "Very well," she agreed finally. "We'll stay, but only until Daisy is stronger and we can travel safely, and I insist on earning my keep." Garrett's smile broadened, crinkling the corners of his eyes in a way that made Penelope's heart flutter unexpectedly. "Then it's settled," he said, rising from the table. "Welcome to Silver Creek Ranch, Miss Hathaway." The days at Silver Creek Ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Penelope helped Mrs. Wilkins with the cooking and cleaning, mended clothes for the ranch hands, and tended to Daisy, who thrived under their combined care. The little girl grew stronger each day, her tiny hands reaching out to grasp at the world around her. A week after her arrival, Penelope sat on the front porch in the cool of the evening, rocking Daisy in a cradle that Garrett had unearthed from the attic. It had belonged to his cousin, he'd explained, presenting it to her with a shyness that belied his otherwise confident demeanor. She heard the approaching hoofbeats and looked up to see Garrett returning from the range, his silhouette outlined against the setting sun. Something about the sight of him made her breath catch. Perhaps it was the easy grace with which he sat his horse, or the quiet authority he exuded as he called out instructions to the hands riding with him. Garrett dismounted and handed his reins to a young stable boy before making his way to the porch. He removed his hat as he approached, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Evening, Miss Hathaway," he greeted her, his voice warm. "How's our little lady today?" Penelope smiled at his use of "our." Over the past week, the entire ranch had adopted Daisy as their collective responsibility, from the gruff cook who saved the creamiest milk for her to the youngest ranch hand who carved a tiny wooden horse as a future toy. She's doing well. Her appetite grows stronger by the day, and Mrs. Wilkins says she's gaining weight properly now. Garrett knelt beside the cradle, his large, calloused finger gently stroking Daisy's cheek. The baby gurgled in response, her tiny hand closing reflexively around his finger. "She's got a strong grip," he observed with a chuckle. "She'll be breaking hearts before we know it." "Like her mother," Penelope said softly, a familiar pang of grief washing over her. "Mary could charm birds from trees." Garrett settled onto the porch step beside her chair, keeping a respectful distance but close enough for conversation. "You haven't spoken much about your sister, or yourself, for that matter." Penelope sighed, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "There isn't much to tell. We grew up in Philadelphia. Our parents died of influenza 5 years ago. Mary met Edward Harris when he came east looking for investors for his silver mine. They fell in love, married, and moved west. I stayed behind to teach at a girls' school. And then," Garrett prompted gently when she fell silent, "then came the telegram. Edward was killed in a cave-in. Mary was alone and with child. I resigned my position and came west to help her." Penelope's voice faltered. But the journey was hard on her. She gave birth on the trail, and the fever took her 3 days later. She felt Garrett's hand cover hers briefly, a gesture of comfort that lasted only seconds but warmed her to her core. "I'm sorry for your losses," he said, his voice rough with genuine sympathy. "It speaks to your character that you've borne such burdens with such grace." Penelope turned to look at him, surprised by the insight. "And what of you, Mr. O'Malley? Mrs. Wilkins mentioned you lost your parents young." A shadow crossed his face. Father was killed defending our farm from raiders during the war. Mother followed him to the grave a year later. Heart just gave out, the doctor said, though I think it was grief that took her. Uncle Walter brought me here, gave me purpose again." "He sounds like a good man." "The best," Garrett agreed. "Taught me everything I know about ranching, about being a man of honor. He and Aunt Margaret never had sons, just their daughter Eleanor. I think they saw me as the son they never had." They sat in companionable silence as darkness settled fully over the land. The first stars appeared in the velvet sky, and from the bunkhouse came the faint sounds of a harmonica. "What will you do when you reach Santa Fe?" Garrett asked eventually, his voice carefully neutral. Penelope had been asking herself the same question with increasing frequency. "My cousin Julia has offered us a place to stay. Her husband owns a mercantile. Perhaps I could work there or find a position teaching again. And if your cousin's situation has changed?" "It's been some time since you've heard from her, hasn't it?" The question gave voice to Penelope's unspoken fear. Then I suppose I shall have to make my own way somehow, for Daisy's sake." Garrett turned to face her fully, his expression earnest in the gathering darkness. "You know, there's always a place for you here. Both of you. Silver Creek could use a school teacher. The rancher's children and the town kids have to ride 10 miles to the nearest school. Uncle Walter's been talking about building one closer." The offer hung in the air between them, fraught with possibilities Penelope dared not examine too closely. There was something about Garrett O'Malley that stirred feelings she thought had died along with her dreams of a family of her own. But she'd known him barely a week, and practical considerations had to take precedence over the flutter in her heart when he smiled at her. "That's very kind," she said carefully, "but I shouldn't make any decisions until I've at least attempted to reach Julia." Garrett nodded, accepting her caution. "Of course, I just wanted you to know there are options." He rose to his feet, settling his hat back on his head. "I should let you get some rest. Good night, Miss Hathaway." "Mr. O'Malley," she called as he reached the steps. He turned back, eyebrows raised in question. "Please, call me Penelope." His smile was like the sunrise, gradual and warming. "Only if you'll call me Garrett." "Good night then, Garrett." "Good night, Penelope." As he walked away toward the bunkhouse, Penelope realized she was smiling. For the first time since Mary's death, the weight of her grief had lifted enough to let in a small ray of hope. 2 weeks after Penelope's arrival at Silver Creek, Walter and Margaret O'Malley returned from Denver. Penelope had been nervous about meeting Garrett's aunt and uncle, afraid they might view her presence as an imposition despite Garrett's assurances to the contrary. Her fears proved groundless. Walter O'Malley was a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh and the same kind eyes as his nephew. Margaret was tall and elegant, with silver-streaked auburn hair and a gentle manner that immediately put Penelope at ease. "So you're the young lady our Garrett rescued," Walter said over dinner that evening, his gaze appraising but kind. "He wrote to us about you and the little one. Said you've been a godsend to Mrs. Wilkins in the kitchen." Penelope blushed. "Your hospitality has been extraordinary. I cannot thank you enough for opening your home to us." Margaret reached across the table to pat Penelope's hand. "Nonsense, dear. Any decent folk would do the same. And it's been a joy having a baby in the house again. Reminds me of when Alina was small." The conversation flowed easily, touching on the O'Malley's business in Denver, the condition of the herd, and local gossip. Penelope found herself drawn into the family dynamic, answering questions about her life in Philadelphia and her brief teaching career. "We've been trying to establish a proper school here for years," Margaret said, her eyes lighting up. "The children currently ride to Willow Creek, but it's too far in winter. Walter has even set aside land for a schoolhouse." "That's what Garrett mentioned," Penelope said, glancing at the man in question, who sat quietly observing the conversation, a small smile playing at his lips. "Did he now?" Walter exchanged a meaningful look with his wife. "And what did you think of the idea?" Penelope chose her words carefully. "It's certainly something to consider. However, I still need to attempt to reach my cousin in Santa Fe. She's expecting us." Of course," Walter agreed. "But there's no rush, is there? The stage only goes to Santa Fe once a week anyway, and the next one isn't for 4 days. Why not stay until then? Give us old folks a chance to enjoy that beautiful baby a bit longer." "You're hardly old, Mr. O'Malley," Penelope said with a smile. "Walter, please." "And she's diplomatic too," he said to his wife with a wink. "We'll keep her." After dinner, while Margaret was cooing over Daisy and Walter had retired to his study with a ledger, Garrett invited Penelope for a walk in the garden. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. "I hope my uncle didn't overwhelm you," Garrett said as they strolled between rows of Margaret's prized roses. He can be rather direct. I found it refreshing, Penelope admitted, and your aunt is lovely. You're fortunate to have such family. I know it, Garrett agreed. They saved me in every way a person can be saved. He hesitated, then added, I've been thinking about your situation. Oh, Penelope's pulse quickened inexplicably. I'll be going into town tomorrow to pick up supplies. I could send a telegram to your cousin in Santa Fe, let her know you're safe and will be arriving soon. It would give her time to prepare for your arrival. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Penelope deeply. That would be wonderful, thank you. They walked in silence for a few moments, the distance between them charged with unspoken words. Penelope found herself hyper-aware of his presence beside her, the sound of his breathing, the occasional brush of his arm against hers, the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed to cling to him. Penelope, Garrett began, then stopped, seemingly struggling with what he wanted to say. She turned to face him, heart pounding at the intensity in his blue eyes. Yes, before he could continue, a ranch hand came running toward them. Mr. Garrett, trouble at the north pasture. Rustlers hit the herd. Jake's been shot. The moment shattered. Garrett's expression shifted instantly from tender uncertainty to grim determination. Get my horse saddled. Tell Pete to ride for the doctor. He turned back to Penelope, regret evident in his eyes. I'm sorry, go, she urged him. Your men need you. With a nod, Garrett hurried after the ranch hand, leaving Penelope standing alone among the roses, her heart filled with a curious mixture of disappointment and concern. Garrett didn't return until well after midnight. Penelope, unable to sleep for worry, had stationed herself in the kitchen with a cup of tea and some mending. When the back door opened, she looked up to find him standing there, hat in hand, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Garrett, she exclaimed, rising quickly. Is everyone all right? The ranch hand who was shot, Jake, will live, Garrett assured her, his voice rough with fatigue. The bullet went clean through his shoulder. Doc Simmons patched him up good. He's resting in the bunkhouse now. And the rustlers got away with 6 head of cattle. Sheriff's forming a posse at first light. Garrett sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping. I'll be riding with them. Penelope moved to the stove, pouring him a cup of the strong coffee she'd kept warm. You should rest first. You look exhausted. He accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. No time. We need to catch them before they cross into Apache territory, or we'll never see those cattle again. Penelope bit her lip, concern washing over her. Is it dangerous? A weary smile touched his lips. Worried about me, Miss Hathaway, Penelope, she corrected automatically. And yes, I am. Rustlers are desperate men, and desperate men are dangerous. I've faced worse, he said, but the gentle tone took any bravado from the words. But it's nice to know someone will be concerned for my safe return. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings growing beyond mere friendship or gratitude. Penelope looked away first, her cheeks warming. Well, if you're determined to go, at least let me pack you some food, she said, rising and moving to the pantry to hide her flustered state. Mrs. Wilkins made fresh bread today, and there's leftover ham that would travel well. She busied herself preparing provisions, acutely aware of Garrett watching her movements. When she turned back, his expression was so tender it nearly took her breath away. You're something special, Penelope Hathaway, he said softly. Do you know that? Before she could formulate a response, he rose and crossed to where she stood. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he raised a hand to her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. I know you're still planning to leave, he murmured. And I won't try to stop you if that's what you truly want. But I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't miss you and Daisy something fierce. Penelope's heart thundered in her chest. Garrett, the sound of footsteps in the hallway broke the moment. Garrett stepped back just as Walter entered the kitchen, dressed in his night clothes with a robe hastily thrown over them. "Thought I heard voices," the older man said, looking between them with knowing eyes. "Everything settled at the north pasture." Garrett cleared his throat, composing himself with visible effort. "For now, I'll be riding with the sheriff's posse at first light." Walter nodded grimly. "I'll have the boys keep a close watch on the rest of the herd. These rustlers are getting bolder. Third raid in as many months." As the men discussed strategy, Penelope finished packing the provisions, her mind whirling with conflicted emotions. The stage to Santa Fe would leave in 4 days. She had planned to be on it, to honor her commitment to her cousin and the path she had set out upon when she left Philadelphia. But now, as she watched Garrett's animated discussion with his uncle, she found herself questioning whether Santa Fe was truly where she belonged. Or was home somehow tied to this copper-haired cowboy who had carried her and Daisy to safety on that fateful night? The posse returned 3 days later, dusty and grim-faced. They had tracked the rustlers to the territorial border but lost them in a sudden thunderstorm that washed away the trail. Garrett looked haggard as he dismounted in the ranch yard, his clothes filthy and a growth of beard darkening his jaw. Penelope had been hanging laundry when the riders appeared. She abandoned her task and hurried toward him, relief flooding through her at the sight of him whole and unharmed. "You're back," she said, stopping a few feet away, suddenly self-conscious about her eagerness. "We were beginning to worry." Garrett's tired face brightened at the sight of her. "Trail was harder to follow than we expected." His eyes searched hers. "The stage to Santa Fe left yesterday." "Yes," Penelope confirmed, twisting her hands in her apron. "It did." Hope dawned in his expression. "You didn't go." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "No, I sent a telegram to my cousin explaining the situation." She understands that traveling with an infant requires careful planning. In truth, Julia's response had been understanding but puzzled. Why delay when the stagecoach line ran regularly? Penelope hadn't been entirely honest in her explanation, unwilling to examine too closely her own reluctance to leave Silver Creek and Garrett. "I'm glad," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than their brevity suggested. A call from the bunkhouse drew his attention. "I should report to your uncle," he said reluctantly. "And I need to clean up. 3 days on the trail leaves a man less than presentable." "Of course," Penelope nodded, stepping back. "Mrs. Wilkins has stew simmering for supper. I'm sure you're hungry." Garrett smiled, the gesture transforming his tired face. "Starving. Save me a bowl, I will." As he walked away, leading his horse toward the stables, Penelope returned to her laundry, her heart lighter than it had been in days. She had bought herself more time at Silver Creek, more time to understand the feelings growing between her and Garrett, more time to decide if she could truly build a life here, in this wild, beautiful country that was so different from everything she had known before. That evening, after supper had been cleared away and Daisy was sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Garrett invited Penelope to join him on the porch. The night was clear, the sky ablaze with stars that seemed close enough to touch. "I've been thinking," Garrett said after they had sat in companionable silence for several minutes. "A dangerous pastime," Penelope teased, drawing a chuckle from him. "Indeed." He turned to face her, his expression serious despite his smile. "I've been thinking about you and Daisy, about your plans." Penelope's pulse quickened. "Oh, Uncle Walter mentioned that he spoke to you about the school." "He did," she confirmed. "It's a wonderful idea. The children here deserve an education." "And you'd be a wonderful teacher," Garrett said earnestly. "You have the patience, the kindness. I've seen how you are with Daisy, how you explain things to the younger ranch hands." Penelope felt a blush rise to her cheeks at his praise. "It's kind of you to say so. It's the truth." Garrett hesitated, then continued. "What if you stayed, Penelope? Not just for a few more days or weeks, but permanently?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither had yet spoken aloud. "Garrett," she began carefully, "are you asking as Silver Creek's foreman who needs a school teacher? Or is there another reason you want me to stay?" He took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "Both. I won't deny that Silver Creek needs a teacher, but more than that, I need you. These past weeks, watching you with Daisy, seeing your strength and grace, I've never met anyone like you, Penelope." He reached for her hand, his larger one enveloping hers with gentle warmth. "I know it's fast. We've known each other barely a month. But out here, life doesn't wait. When you find something precious, you hold onto it with both hands." Penelope's heart soared at his words, even as caution tempered her joy. "What about Daisy? She's my responsibility now. She'd be ours," Garrett said without hesitation. "I already love that little girl like she was my own flesh and blood, and I'd spend the rest of my days making sure neither of you ever wanted for anything." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," Garrett urged, squeezing her hand gently. "Say you'll think about making Silver Creek your home, our home." Penelope looked out at the vast landscape, silver-washed by moonlight. When she had first arrived here, exhausted and grief-stricken, she'd seen only the harshness of the frontier. Now she saw its beauty, its possibilities. She saw a future she hadn't dared imagine. "I will," she promised, turning back to meet his gaze. "I'll consider it." Garrett's smile was radiant. Slowly, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture, old-fashioned and respectful, touched Penelope deeply. "That's all I ask," he murmured. "For now." The following weeks brought a flurry of activity to Silver Creek Ranch. Walter O'Malley, energized by Penelope's tentative agreement to consider staying, accelerated his plans for the schoolhouse. A site was chosen near the crossroads that connected several neighboring ranches, and construction began immediately. Penelope found herself swept up in the excitement, offering suggestions about the layout and necessary supplies. She wrote to her former colleagues in Philadelphia, requesting recommendations for textbooks and teaching materials suitable for a frontier school with students of varying ages and abilities. All the while, her relationship with Garrett deepened. They spent every free moment together riding across the ranch lands, picnicking by the creek that gave the property its name, or simply sitting on the porch after supper, talking about everything and nothing. Garrett told her stories of growing up in Chicago before coming west, of his dreams for the ranch, of the family he hoped to have someday. Penelope shared memories of Mary, of her life as a teacher, of the books and ideas that had shaped her worldview, and Daisy thrived under their combined care. The baby grew plumper and more alert each day, beginning to coo and smile in response to their voices. Garrett fashioned a sturdy carrying sling that allowed Penelope to keep Daisy close while leaving her hands free for work, and he often volunteered to watch the infant while Penelope helped Margaret with household tasks. "He's going to make a wonderful father someday," Margaret observed one afternoon as they watched Garrett through the kitchen window, gently bouncing Daisy while pointing out different animals in the barnyard. Penelope's cheeks warmed. "He's very good with her." Margaret gave her a knowing look. "My nephew is head over heels in love with you, you know. I haven't seen him this happy since before his parents died." "I care for him too," Penelope admitted softly. "More than I expected to." "But," Margaret prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation. Penelope sighed. Everything has happened so quickly. 3 months ago, I was teaching in Philadelphia. Now I'm considering staying permanently in a place I barely know, with a man I've known barely a month. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Life on the frontier moves at its own pace. Sometimes slow as molasses, other times quick as lightning. When Walter proposed to me, we'd known each other exactly 17 days. Really? Penelope's eyes widened in surprise. Really, Margaret confirmed with a smile. 42 years later, I've never regretted saying yes. But, she added, patting Penelope's hand, every woman must make her own choices. Don't let anyone, not even my lovesick nephew, rush you into a decision you're not ready to make. The conversation lingered in Penelope's mind as she went about her days. Her feelings for Garrett grew stronger with each passing sunset, each shared smile, each moment of connection. Yet a small voice of caution still whispered in her ear, urging her to be certain before committing her future and Daisy's to this place and this man. The decision was complicated by a letter that arrived from her cousin Julia in Santa Fe. The missive was friendly but contained concerning news. Julia's husband had fallen ill, and their living situation had become precarious. While Julia still welcomed Penelope and Daisy, she warned that accommodations would be cramped and opportunities for employment uncertain. "Bad news?" Garrett asked, finding Penelope on the porch, the letter clutched in her hand. She explained the situation, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "I'm sorry about your cousin's husband," he said sincerely, "but I can't pretend I'm sorry that Santa Fe seems less appealing now." He took her hand, his expression earnest. "Penelope, I've been patient. I've tried not to pressure you, but I need to know, are you any closer to deciding?" The vulnerability in his eyes touched her deeply. This strong, capable man who commanded respect from hardened cowboys and faced down rustlers without flinching was laying his heart bare before her, waiting for her verdict with barely concealed apprehension. "I am," she said softly. "Closer to deciding, that is." Hope brightened his features. And Penelope took a deep breath. "The schoolhouse will be finished next week. Walter has already arranged for supplies to be delivered. The community is counting on having a teacher." "And I'm counting on having you," Garrett said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just as Silver Creek's teacher, but as my wife, Penelope. I love you. I think I've loved you since that first night when you stood so proud and determined on the trail with Daisy in your arms." The declaration, though not unexpected, still stole Penelope's breath. "Garrett, I know it's sudden," he rushed on. "I know proper courtship should take longer, but there's nothing proper about how we met, about any of this. I just know that I love you and I want to build a life with you and Daisy. I want to be a father to her, a husband to you. I want us to be a family." Tears filled Penelope's eyes as the last of her reservations melted away. In that moment, looking into Garrett's earnest blue eyes, she knew with bone-deep certainty that this was where she belonged. "Yes," she whispered. Garrett blinked as if unsure he'd heard correctly. "Yes," a smile broke through her tears. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll teach at the school. And yes, Garrett O'Malley, I will marry you." With a whoop of joy that startled the chickens in the nearby yard, Garrett swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed through her tears. When he set her down, his own eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you, Penelope Hathaway," he said, framing her face with his hands. "With everything I am." "And I love you," she replied, the words feeling right and true in a way nothing else had since Mary's death. Slowly, reverently, Garrett lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question and a promise combined. Then, as Penelope responded, it deepened into something more powerful, a seal on the future they would build together. When they finally broke apart, breathless and flushed, The setting sun had painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, as if nature itself was celebrating their commitment. "When?" Garrett asked, his forehead resting against hers. "When will you marry me?" Penelope smiled, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had carried her and Daisy to safety when all seemed lost. "As soon as the preacher can get here. I don't want to wait another day to start our life together." The wedding took place 2 weeks later on a perfect autumn day. The ceremony was held in the newly completed schoolhouse, with sunlight streaming through windows that still smelled of fresh cut pine. Reverend Thomas came from Willow Creek to officiate, and it seemed the entire community turned out to witness the union of Silver Creek's foreman and its new schoolteacher. Penelope wore a dress of ivory silk that Margaret had ordered from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned Margaret's own wedding gown. Daisy, now nearly 3 months old and growing stronger every day, was dressed in a christening gown that had belonged to Alina, her dark curls crowned with a tiny wreath of wildflowers. Walter stood beside Garrett as his best man, while Margaret, who had become like a mother to Penelope in the short time they'd known each other, held Daisy and served as matron of honor. The ranch hands had scrubbed themselves clean and donned their Sunday best, filling the schoolhouse with the scent of bay rum and saddle soap. As Penelope walked down the makeshift aisle on Walter's arm, her eyes locked with Garrett's. The love shining in his gaze made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. He stood tall and proud in a new black suit, his copper hair freshly trimmed, his beard neatly groomed. When Walter placed her hand in Garrett's, the rightness of the moment overwhelmed her. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Thomas began, his voice solemn yet joyful, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The traditional words washed over Penelope as she stood facing Garrett, their hands joined, their futures intertwined. She thought of the long journey that had brought her here, the grief and loss, the uncertainty and fear. How strange that the darkest moment of her life, stumbling exhausted along a lonely trail with her sister's baby in her arms, had led her to this moment of purest joy. When it came time for their vows, Garrett spoke with clear conviction, his voice carrying to every corner of the schoolhouse. "I, Garrett Daniel O'Malley, take thee, Penelope Jane Hathaway, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Penelope's voice trembled slightly as she repeated the sacred words, but her eyes never left Garrett's. "I, Penelope Jane Hathaway, take thee, Garrett Daniel O'Malley, to be my lawfully wedded husband." The exchange of rings followed a simple gold band for Penelope that had belonged to Garrett's mother, and a sturdy silver ring for Garrett that Walter had helped Penelope select from the jeweler in Willow Creek. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Thomas proclaimed finally, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled broadly at Garrett. "You may kiss your bride." The schoolhouse erupted in cheers and whistles as Garrett drew Penelope into his arms, sealing their union with a kiss that managed to be both respectful of their audience and a promise of the passion they would share in private. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife, Margaret stepped forward with Daisy. Garrett took the baby in his strong arms, then extended his other arm to Penelope, drawing her close to his side. Together, the three of them walked down the aisle and into the bright sunshine of their new life together. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. Tables were set up outside the schoolhouse, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Wilkins and the neighboring ranch wives. Walter broke out barrels of his finest whiskey, and a fiddler from town played lively tunes that soon had everyone dancing on the packed earth of the schoolyard. As the sun began to set, painting the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Garrett found Penelope sitting with Daisy at the edge of the festivities. The baby had fallen asleep in her arms, exhausted by the excitement and attention. "Mrs. O'Malley," he said, the name a caress on his lips as he sat beside her. "How does it feel?" Penelope looked up at her husband, and felt a wave of contentment wash over her. "Perfect," she answered honestly. "It feels absolutely perfect." Garrett's arm encircled her shoulders, drawing her against his side. "I've had a cabin built for us on the eastern edge of the ranch property, close enough to the main house and the school, but private. Uncle Walter gave us the land as a wedding present." Surprise and delight filled Penelope. "When did you find time to build a cabin?" Garrett grinned, looking boyish despite his beard. "Been working on it every spare minute for weeks. The boys helped, wanted it to be a surprise." "It certainly is," Penelope said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Our own home." "For now," Garrett added. "I plan to build us a proper house eventually, something big enough for Daisy and any brothers or sisters that might come along." The thought of expanding their family sent a thrill through Penelope. Already, she could imagine more children, perhaps with Garrett's copper hair and her green eyes running across the ranch lands, filling their home with laughter. "I'd like that," she said softly. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Walter called for attention, raising his glass in a toast to the newlyweds. "To Garrett and Penelope," he boomed, his voice carrying across the gathering. "May your days be long, your sorrows few, and your happiness boundless." "And to little Daisy," he added with a tender smile for the sleeping infant, "who brought these two together through the most unexpected of circumstances." "Hear, hear," came the response from the assembled guests, glasses raised high. Later, as the party continued around them, Garrett leaned close to whisper in Penelope's ear, "Ready to see our new home, wife?" The words sent a shiver of delight down Penelope's spine. "Yes," she answered simply. They made their goodbyes, accepting congratulations and well wishes with grateful smiles. "Margaret took Daisy for the night, my wedding gift to you both," she said with a knowing wink that made Penelope blush, and Garrett led his bride to where two horses waited, saddled and ready. The ride to their new home took less than 20 minutes, but to Penelope it felt like a journey into a dream. The moon had risen, full and bright, illuminating the landscape in silver light. Garrett rode beside her, occasionally reaching across to touch her hand, as if reassuring himself that she was real, that this happiness was not an illusion. The cabin appeared around a bend in the trail, nestled among cottonwood trees that rustled gently in the night breeze. It was larger than Penelope had expected, a substantial structure of log and stone, with a wide porch across the front and chimneys at either end. Warm light spilled from the windows, welcoming them home. Mrs. Wilkins came ahead to light the lamps and stoke the fires, Garrett explained as he helped Penelope dismount. "Wanted everything to be perfect for us." He tethered the horses, then turned to his bride with a smile that made her heart race. "Tradition says I should carry you across the threshold." Before Penelope could respond, he swept her into his arms as easily as he had that first night on the trail. But this time, instead of exhaustion and fear, Penelope felt only joy and anticipation as Garrett carried her up the porch steps and through the door of their new home. The interior was simple but beautiful, a large main room with a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture crafted by local hands, colorful quilts and curtains that Margaret and Mrs. Wilkins must have prepared in secret. Doors led off to what Penelope assumed were bedrooms and a kitchen. Garrett set her gently on her feet but kept his arms around her waist. "Welcome home, Penelope O'Malley." The name, her new name, filled her with a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since her parents died. "It's beautiful, Garrett. I can't believe you did all this." "For you," he said simply. "Everything I do from now on will be for you and Daisy." Penelope raised a hand to his cheek, overwhelmed by the love she felt for this man who had transformed her life so completely. "I love you, Garrett O'Malley." His eyes darkened with emotion. "And I love you more than I have words to express." He lowered his head, capturing her lips in a kiss that held all the passion they had restrained in public. Penelope melted into him, her arms winding around his neck as the kiss deepened. All the uncertainties and fears that had haunted her journey west faded away, replaced by the certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the arms of the man who had carried her to safety when all seemed lost. 10 years later, the schoolyard echoed with children's laughter as Penelope rang the bell, signaling the end of the day's lessons. Students spilled from the white clapboard building, calling farewells to their teacher and each other as they scattered to waiting horses or parents' wagons. "Don't forget your compositions are due tomorrow," Penelope called after them, smiling at the good-natured groans that answered her reminder. As the yard emptied, a familiar figure on horseback appeared on the road from Silver Creek Ranch. Penelope's heart gave the same little jump it always did at the sight of her husband, even after a decade of marriage. Garrett dismounted with the same fluid grace he'd shown the night they met, though a few strands of silver now threaded through his copper hair at the temples. He tethered his horse to the hitching post and strode toward her, sweeping off his hat as he approached. "Mrs. O'Malley," he greeted her with a grin, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Might I offer you and your young charges a ride home, Mr. O'Malley?" she returned, matching his playful formality. "How fortuitous. We were just about to start walking." From inside the schoolhouse came the sound of childish voices, then the thundering of small feet as 3 children burst through the door. "Papa!" cried 8-year-old Daisy, her dark curls bouncing as she flew down the steps and into Garrett's waiting arms. Though not his by blood, she was his daughter in every way that mattered, carrying his name and his unconditional love. Close behind her came 6-year-old William, named for Penelope's father, and 4-year-old Grace, who had inherited Garrett's copper hair and Penelope's green eyes. While Daisy wrapped her arms around Garrett's neck, the younger two attached themselves to his legs, creating a tangle of O'Malley children that made Penelope laugh. "Did you bring Dancer?" William asked, referring to the gentle pony that was his pride and joy. "He's tied up behind Atlas," Garrett confirmed, "and Grace's pony too." "And what about Mama?" Daisy asked, practical as always. "Did you bring Starlight for her?" Garrett winked at his eldest daughter. "Your mama will ride with me just like in the old days." Penelope felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the memory of those early rides together, her arms around Garrett's waist, her cheek pressed against his broad back. Some things never changed. Once the schoolhouse was locked up and Penelope had gathered her books and papers, the family mounted their respective horses, the children on their ponies. Penelope settled in front of Garrett on Atlas, her back against his chest, his arms around her waist to hold the reins. "Comfortable," he murmured in her ear as the children rode ahead, already engaged in some game of their own invention. "Always," she replied, leaning into his solid warmth. They rode at a leisurely pace, enjoying the golden light of the late afternoon sun on the landscape that had become home. Silver Creek Ranch had prospered under Walter's leadership and Garrett's management, expanding its operations and becoming one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. The small school where Penelope taught had grown as well, now serving 25 students from the surrounding ranches and the town that had sprung up around the crossroads. "Letter came today," Garrett mentioned as they crested a hill overlooking their property. "From Julia." Penelope brightened at the news. After her cousin's husband had died, Julia had finally made the journey west to visit, falling in love with Silver Creek, and unexpectedly, with the widowed local doctor. Now she lived just 10 miles away, her mercantile skills making her an invaluable addition to the growing community. "Good news, I hope. The best," Garrett confirmed. "She's expecting." Doc's beside himself with joy. Penelope smiled, genuinely happy for her cousin who had found love later in life but no less powerfully. "We'll have to visit this weekend. Take them a basket from the garden." Their conversation paused as they reached the fork in the road where their property began. The original cabin where they had spent their wedding night still stood, though it now served as a guest house. Their home was the 2-story house Garrett had built 3 years after their marriage, a comfortable dwelling with a wraparound porch and room for their growing family. "Mama, can we go see the new foal before supper?" Daisy called back, already steering her pony toward the stables. "Only if you finish your chores first," Penelope answered, sharing an amused glance with Garrett. Daisy had inherited her mother's love of horses and showed every sign of becoming an excellent horsewoman. As the children raced ahead, Garrett reined Atlas to a stop on a small rise overlooking their home. The setting sun gilded the scene, the white-painted house with smoke curling from its chimneys, the well-kept barns and corrals, the kitchen garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. Beyond lay the vast expanse of ranch land, dotted with cattle and bordered by distant mountains. "Happy?" Garrett asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Penelope turned her head to meet his gaze, seeing in his beloved face the same young cowboy who had found her on the trail that fateful night, who had said those simple words that changed her life. "Let me carry you both." "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. "You." His arms tightened around her waist and he pressed a kiss to her temple. "I have everything a man could want right here in my arms. Everything." As they rode the final distance to their home, where their children waited and the lights burned welcome in the gathering dusk, Penelope silently blessed the twisted path of fate that had brought her west. The journey had begun in grief and desperation, with a baby in her arms and an uncertain future stretching before her. It had led her to this, to love, to family, to belonging, to a life richer and fuller than anything she could have imagined that night when a kind-hearted cowboy had offered to carry her burden, and in doing so, had carried her home.